Hey TYT, this is Nomi Const. We're here at the Democratic Socialists of America Conference in Chicago. Record turnout because they have had a record registration. It's been extraordinary. They've hit all their goals. You know, after the election last year where Bernie Sanders obviously mainstreamed democratic socialism, but it's not a new concept. And it is, while it's gaining a lot of momentum in the United States, especially among former Bernie supporters and current Bernie supporters and progressives and labor supporters, it is very popular overseas in other countries. And so one of the amazing things that we're going to be doing here at the DSA conference is talking about how the Labor Party, the labor movement, is functioning overseas. Clearly, the dynamics are very different. We have a different electoral system here. It's very complicated and there's a lot of money involved. But you know, we can learn from our friends overseas. We all were paying attention to Jeremy Corbyn's race in the UK, rooting for him. And I think a lot of folks want to know, will he be prime minister? Well, we've got a real, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. In real life, he came overseas to Chicago.
Corbynista in the flesh.
Corbynista in the flesh. We have, from the Labor Momentum movement, Marcus Barnett, who is on the executive committee for the New Labour,
London Young Labour.
London Young Labour. So you've already screwed it up. This is why I need a notebook with me. Thanks for being here.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay, what is the Labour movement? What is the Labour Party in the UK?
So the Labour Party was established in the early 20th century to be the political expression of the working class movement, which is the trade union movement, of course. After several years of steadily gaining MPs in a slow but, serious fashion, we ended up coming to power in the 1920s. From then on, we had like a long period of growth again, and which built up into the 1945 Labour government, which was a huge majority and implemented widespread social reform across British society. Our Prime Minister Clement Attlee is regularly sort of appears in polls as being the most popular Prime Minister of all time. He did such things as nationalising the coal mines. He created the National Health Service. He nationalised the docks. It was a very, very special time, and it's a period which we remember today very, very fondly.
It sounds so similar to the same period of time in our country.
Yeah,
under a man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. So you had your version of the New Deal in the UK at the same exact time.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. We were a little bit more overt about using the word socialism because the demand was such after the Second World War that, in the words of Tony Benn, who was a great Labour politician, if we can find the money to kill people, then why can't we find the money to help people? And that's the ethos of socialism, really, isn't it? And that's why we all do it. That sentiment was so rife in British society that we could overtly say, look, we are a socialist party, we're unashamed of that, and we are going to implement a socialist manifesto to irrevocably change Great Britain.
And then the Labour Party remained in power for a bit. It still was a significant force, but it declined. Now it's got,
Absolutely.
Obviously it's rebounded. So tell us about just like how this all evolved over the last 180 years.
Okay, so after we implemented the 1945 manifesto, we managed to establish a new consensus in British society, which involved high state expenditure, the development of a real welfare state, decolonisation, and that was accepted by the Conservative Party, broadly speaking, as well as the Labour Party. And this was a form of political consensus which went through the 1960s and 70s and ended in 1979 with the election of Margaret Thatcher, who then implemented a widespread scale of reactionary turning backs of the clock in order to benefit very, very, very wealthy people in British society. It involved a programme of taking on the trade unions forcefully and breaking up the sort of corporatism that existed in the 60s and 70s, the ramifications of which we still feel today.
So why is it that there's this resurgence now? And Jeremy Corbyn, who has been around, is the Bernie Sanders of the UK. He's been around for a long time, been very active for a long time. Why is it suddenly he's gained so much popularity?
I think people are very, very sick of the political consensus, especially the centrist political consensus, where all you needed to do to win an election was tinker around with some sort of imagined swinging voter, which is inherently selfish, inherently middle class, inherently interested in nothing but themselves, and also not loyal to any political idea, any notion of how they want society to look like. It was a very, very narrow view, and we were competing over this for such a long period of time since Tony Blair left, and I think a lot of people realised that society was moving so far away from where we wanted it to be. Lots of Labour Party members recognised the party itself was moving so far from where we wanted the party to be and the type of vision that we want, Britain to be. The Labour Party just seemed to be incapable of doing that using the same old machine politicians. So in the summer of 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn got on the leadership ballot, there was just this huge, mostly in terms of youth, like this huge upsurge in support for traditional Labour politics, and it led to the biggest victory of the left since 1945.
Now what?
Well, I think all sides of the party now recognise, after very tumultuous times, that Jeremy is the leader of the Labour Party. We saw the biggest increase in the vote share for the Labour Party since 1945. The manifesto is consistently given in various opinion polls as the core reason for why people voted for the Labour Party. And he's inspired a new generation of young activists who want to take that Labour message to the doorstep. I think, obviously, as you saw, the result was much better than most pundits expected. Most pundits, most journalists, most political analysts got it completely wrong, And I think we're looking at a situation, a potentially volatile situation in British politics, where the government might have won the election, but it has very, very little popular legitimacy. If there was an election called tomorrow, Labour would win the election and guarantee itself a majority. I think it's a very, very optimistic period to be a Labour Party supporter right now, as I think within the next 2 years the instability will increase, the contradictions will intensify, and I think we could be looking at a situation where, within the next 18 to 24 months, a general election will be called and the Labour Party will be victorious and Jeremy Corbyn will be Prime Minister.
You're here at the DSA conference in the United States, and our electoral system is very different. I wouldn't say it's more complicated, but we have 50 states, we have several counties, the way our parties are broken down, and it's been two-party rule really for the last 80 years, 90 years, more now, 100 years. What can progressives, that's what we call our labor movement, what can progressives learn from your success and watching what's happening here at DSA, watching them in action? What are you surprised by? What do you think they could take from your movement?
Well, I mean, it's funny that you say this now, because we were learning a lot from Bernie Sanders. But Bernie congratulated Jeremy the morning after the election. He said, congratulations, I'm amazed by some of the tactics that you used. Where did you learn them from? And Jeremy said, well, actually, I learned it from you, Bernie. I think the lesson that can be taught is that you should, despite the fact you didn't get your guy in terms of Bernie, you should dare to be a Daniel in the lion's den sometimes. You should dare to set your own agenda. Don't kowtow to what centrist political pundits say. They live on their own planet and they're usually wrong. I think you can create a new common sense of political normalcy in your country, where it's not right that there's not a universal healthcare system. It's not right that people are living in poverty. It's not right there's mass unemployment. It's not right that there's a racialized system in terms of the prison system and the police. And I think if you hammer this clear, coherent message enough, in the same way that the Labour Party hammered a new vision of a social democratic Britain, which would constitutively break from neoliberalism, then I think you can start seeing the world that you'd like to see, or at least the America that you'd like to see. And maybe next time you can get your guy.
Functionally, watching people debate here. There's a very large room, probably over 1,000 people are in this room, debating the rules of DSA. I've been covering the Democratic Party for a long time. I was very active in the Democratic Party. Just from the standpoint of where the Democrats stand, there's a lot of talk about reform, not a lot of action regarding reform. There's not a lot of debate about the rules and not a lot of adherence to the rules. Sure. But you're seeing a lot of it here. So much so that it goes on for hours. Ultra democratic. Literally, every single piece of the rules was debated. If this is a 27,000 member organization.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's incredible. But if there's that much, does it continue to be that kind of democratic process as it grows, if it does become as large as, say, the Democratic Party is?
Well, if you're starting to talk about maybe the DSA growing so large that it could be something akin to the Labour Party in Great Britain, which seems to be what quite a lot of people are actually sort of visualising when they talk about the future for the DSA, then maybe you should start looking into the internal structures in which the Labour Party operated until the situation we have now. The situation we have now was implemented by the Collins Review, which ironically was meant to break up the left. It was meant to break up working class power inside of the Labour Party. It was intended to give Blairite careerists a full easy run at party leadership every single time. The whole role of it was to make sure trade unions no longer had a block vote, to guarantee at least that their candidate would do at least modestly, for future bargaining with any potential leadership. They were trying to model actually on the Democratic primaries, and just due to their lack of understanding of the political conditions that existed in Britain, it's not gone their way whatsoever, and they've inadvertently provided a old school socialist with the greatest mandate of any Labour leader in British political history. So I think you could be looking in terms of having affiliated trade unions. I believe there already is some DSA affiliated unions, but I think it would be healthy to have them in candidate selections for elections to the state legislature. You could have them passing votes at conferences where they have a commanded block vote. These are the things that I think would create a semblance of political normality, and would also establish, I think, in a very real sense, an institutional party of organised labour in the United States.
Do you think that DSA can exist within the Democratic Party? I mean, we have WFP, the Working Families Party, in several states. A lot of this comes down to ballot access. And if you don't have a line, I mean, I was saying this outside in the hall to another reporter earlier. I said, the Democratic Party lacks a lot of support right now. They don't have the organizers. They're not getting in the money that they used to get. But what they have is access to the ballot. They have the line. And if you don't have that line, you can't compete. Yeah. So do you see DSA functioning within the DNC like WFP kind of does?
Well, I mean, for the time being, it's a matter of political reality, isn't it? That I don't want to lecture. I'm sure loads of people know a lot more about the Democrats than I do. But yeah, it's really interesting. But I mean, I think currently, just because of political realities, it's very wise that socialists organise within the Democratic Party as as a conduit for activities and a way to recruit further people, as a way to convince people in a much broader sense of socialist ideas, and also as a way of excusing the electoral failures of socialists. Usually when they stand independently and they get less than 1% or whatever, I think it's a terrain well worth fighting in terms of being inside of the Democrats.
How strong is the Labour movement, but the actual movement, while we might have a movement being pro-Labor, Labor is under attack in our country. It's at its weakest point in history since we've had organized labor in this country. I would it's arguable, but we've seen quite a bit of an assault, a lot of big money up against labor. Today there's a big fight in Mississippi with the Nissan workers, and there's a lot of money being thrown at these workers to divide workers racially. The EU has been much more, and the UK have been much more inclusive of labor. Has it weakened, even though the Labour Party has strengthened?
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting dynamic to that. British organised labour has declined since the miners' strike in 1984, which was the sort of linchpin strike. It was really the sort of moment in British history which, since at least until the 1600s, it felt like the closest Britain has ever come to civil war in terms of two competing visions about what people wanted Britain to look like. And unfortunately, our side lost, and we've had 30 years of poverty, drug addiction, and neoliberalism in our working class communities. That's a real issue, and we're not particularly growing either. I mean, from a personal perspective, my trade union, the RMT, which is a Railway Workers and Seafarers Union, through militant organising and aggressive defence of our members' jobs, pay and conditions, we've actually managed to grow our membership year upon year upon year. But you can't say the same for unions such as Unite, Unison, the GMB, who are steadily losing their members due to an amalgam of reasons. I wouldn't necessarily say it's just down to laziness on their part. These people work very, very hard, but we're restricted very heavily in terms of recruitment by our own anti-union laws that were brought in by the Tories in the 90s. That restricts our activity heavily. One of the most optimistic things you can sense from a new Labour government is that John McDonnell has long been an advocate of trade union freedom. He's the Shadow Chancellor, by the way. He's been a very, very serious advocate of the trade unions for years now. And Jeremy Corbyn and him have promised, they've pledged that within the first 100 days of a Labour administration, they will repeal the Trade Union Act. Wow. From then on, we can start seeing mass recruitment, organising campaigns, a return to the closed shop perhaps. We can start seeing all sorts of optimistic things, but I think the primacy now is the political struggle.
Fascinating conversation. We'll be watching very closely, and hopefully, maybe in the future, we'll make it out to the UK and do some interviewing live. Marcus Bennett, who's on the executive board of the London New Labour. Yes, the Labour Party in the UK. See what you learn at a DSA conference? I'm Nomi Khanst. We're here at the DSA conference in Chicago, here for TYT Politics. Thanks.